This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
WHO continues emergency status for Ebola outbreak in DR Congo. The United Nations Security Council sends delegation to South Sudan to support peace efforts. And global music bands together in Tunisia to celebrate African arts and culture. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories you can expect in the hour. And in business news, South Africa's cabinet approves long-term electricity generation plan. And in sport, South Africa hosts an international tennis event for both able-bodied and wheelchair athletes. We begin our bulletin in the DR Congo, where the World Health Organization has said that the Ebola virus is now infecting and killing people in a gold mining area of the country. The outbreak, which the global body said still constitutes an international emergency, is even now complex and dangerous. The virus has so far infected 3,227 people and killed 2,104 since the outbreak was declared in August 2018. CGTN's Beryl Ora brings us that report.
The World Health Organization's Independent Emergency Committee has said in a statement that the Ebola epidemic, which is currently concentrated in the Mandima health zone, could return due to instability in the eastern part of DRC.
As you have heard, the Emergency Committee has recommended that the current Ebola outbreak continues to pose a public health emergency of international concern. I have accepted that advice. So the public health emergency of international concern status will be maintained for additional 3 months. The emergency committee will be reconvened within 3 months to reassess again. This outbreak remains a complex and dangerous outbreak.
In its latest update, the WHO said that 15 new confirmed cases were reported in North Kivu and Ituri provinces in the week of October the 13th, compared with nearly 130 cases per week at the peak in April.
It will end, and we're giving it our best. But one thing I would like to underline here is, even if this Ebola ends, it may come back again, because the preconditions are there. Then the health system, as a result of conflict of more than 2 decades, is weakened. It's like it doesn't exist. So that also is another precondition.
The ongoing insecurity has hampered access to parts of Mandima and created challenges in finding infected people and tracing their contacts, as well as ensuring safe burials.
The access to the communities there is compromised, given both the terrain and the difficulty. There's both legal and illegal mining in that area. We are using community health workers and relays at community level to provide information. So we have been involved in very deep negotiations with the local community, working with MSF, working with UNICEF and others. So we don't believe we're dealing with a catastrophic situation. The numbers are extremely low compared to before, but we don't fully understand the dynamics of transmission in the Biakato mine area.
According to the global health body, 31 of the 50 Ebola cases reported in the last 3 weeks were from or linked to Biakato area in the eastern part of DRC. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has welcomed the approval by the European drugs regulator for an experimental vaccine for protection against Ebola. The vaccine has been shown to be effective in protecting people from the Ebola virus. We earlier spoke to Dr. Margaret Harris, who is spokesperson for the World Health Organization Ebola response team in the DRC. This is what she had to say.
Right now, we could almost call it as if we're on a knife edge. We've seen a significant reduction in the number of people getting sick each week, but we are still seeing between 3 and one person getting ill each day. So that means that we're still seeing about 20 people getting ill each week. And of course, that's too many. So we hope that if we can really get the work going and really get the work done well in the next couple of weeks, we have a chance of finishing, but we are certainly not over yet. The European Medicines Agency has just announced that they're going to recommend conditional licensing of the vaccine that's currently being used. That's the Merck vaccine, which will be called Erebov when it's licensed. And what was not really understood by the people making those calls is that while the vaccine was an experimental vaccine, we couldn't have an independent body because it wasn't something that was commercially available. But now that it will be commercially available soon, indeed, WHO is now working to set up a mechanism to ensure that there will be a global body regulating the supply, because once it's commercially available, the risk is that wealthy countries will buy up all the supplies, and it won't be available for the less wealthy countries, where, as you know, Ebola tends to be the greatest risk. What really needs to be done is a lot more very good, very strong work in partnership with the communities that are affected. We still are seeing people who have not come forward when they become ill, either because they were frightened or perhaps they really didn't believe they had Ebola. There are still people who don't think Ebola is real. And whenever that happens, it's what we call silent transmission. There's a tremendous risk that other people in the community are still being infected. So there's an enormous amount of work to be done, but if the work's done well, we do believe we have a chance of finally getting this outbreak to finish.
Well, the United Nations Security Council is sending a delegation to the capital of South Sudan on Sunday to support the country's peace process and observe efforts to form a unity government. In Juba, Security Council diplomats are slated to meet with President Salva Kiir and other signatories to the 2018 peace agreement. Our UN correspondent, Li Tan, has more from New York.
For their Juba visit, Security Council members hope to see first-hand conditions on the ground to get a gauge on South Sudan's progress towards implementing the fragile 2018 peace deal known as the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict of the Republic of South Sudan. Now, it's an agreement that holds the fate of the world's youngest nation in its wording, and the Security Council is pushing for the peace process to be sped up, even as factors on the ground threaten to derail efforts. The Security Council's visit to Juba comes nearly 2 weeks after the deal marked its one-year anniversary, but also as tensions are putting at risk a key November 12th deadline to set up a unity government. Now, under that agreement, President Salva Kiir, with whom the Security Council is scheduled to meet on Sunday, is to set up a coalition government with opposition leader Riek Machar as his deputy. Now, the government said this week that Machar is expected to return to Juba from Sudan for another round of peace talks with the president, hopefully on Sunday, to coincide with the Security Council's visit. But Machar had until recently refused to return unless his safety can be assured, raising questions about further delays in implementing the peace process that has already been delayed by fighting, insufficient funds, and the humanitarian crisis. Now, the peace deal also requires a national army made up of troops from both sides, which is an added challenge. So, the Security Council is traveling to Juba at a time when hopes may be high, but continued clashes and a significant amount of political mistrust makes the situation precarious and the peace process still very much uncertain. Now, it's also unclear what kind of impact the visit will have, as the delegation will be there for only a few hours before flying off to Addis Ababa for next week's annual African Union Peace and Security Council consultations. Li Tan, CGTN, New York.
In an effort to reach out to opposition leaders, the UN mission to South Sudan has visited an opposition-controlled area. The joint force talked to military leaders as well as civilians about the upcoming establishment of a transitional government.
The UN peacekeeping mission to South Sudan and the ceasefire and transitional security arrangements, monitoring and verification mechanisms are in this opposition-controlled area to meet with military commanders. Their visit comes as opposition voices frustration at the implementation of a transitional government.
Why should we be left in the bush for such a long time? And why hasn't the peace agreement been implemented yet? Why? That doesn't make any sense. This is my message to IGAD, the UN, and to whom it may concern. This message should go everywhere because we need peace. They shouldn't extend the time before implementing the peace agreement.
The welfare of residents remains UNMISS's main objective in Lirangu.
We are continuing closely to monitor the situation, and we express to them the need for the protection of civilians, especially in this area where the civilians live together with the military in their controlled area. Now, for the civilians who are here, we continue to urge the commanders to respect them, to treat them humanely, and not to conduct any activities that would violate them.
Authorities have until November 12th to set up a transitional government. Astatal, CGTN.
The Sudanese government and rebels have also resumed talks in the capital, Juba. They come after SPLM and Security General Ahmad Amman agreed on Thursday to return to the negotiating table after accusing government forces of bombing its territory. The talks are being mediated by South Sudan and backed by regional leaders, including Ethiopian Prime Minister and the Ugandan President.
The return of talks between Sudanese government and rebels is seen as a great achievement in the peace process. The opposition had threatened to pull out, accusing government of carrying attacks in the Nuba Mountains. But it now says the government has made some positive steps towards addressing the issue. Officials from all sides have since managed to pin down a partial agenda for discussions.
First, following the direct engagement between the two delegations, SPLM North and the transition government of the Republic of Sudan, the parties have agreed on categorizing and sequencing the negotiation issues. Second, the parties have agreed on the necessity to agree on a declaration of principles as a roadmap that governs the negotiation process.
Each and every party will present its position paper regarding reaching a declaration of principles to be the roadmap that will guide the process in the forthcoming talks, peace talks.
The parties' discussions will focus on political, humanitarian issues and security arrangements. The talks are expected to resolve the conflict and will last at least 2 months. Similar talks mediated by the African Union over the past 10 years failed. Chom Hono, CGTN.
Well, the British Parliament will vote in the next few hours on a new Brexit deal. It's a last-minute push to pass a divorce deal with the European Union before the October 31st deadline. Lawmakers are convening on a Saturday for the first time in nearly 4 decades, and after what's likely to be a highly charged debate. The crucial voting will start at 13:30 GMT. The Prime Minister has been lobbying a divided Parliament, calling for an end to what he says has been a never-ending saga. Well, let's now take a listen in as UK lawmakers hold that historic Brexit debate.
The deal negotiated by his predecessor had been dropped from his deal.
The reason I'm not worried about that, Mr. Speaker, is there are no new rules of origins checks, and this is a deal that I hope he will get behind and support because it represents stability and certainty for business.
Kirsten Hare.
There are other voices from Scotland that are asking Scottish MPs the National Farmers Union for Scotland, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, the Scotch Whisky Association, who all believe this is best for industry, the economy and jobs. And Scottish nationalists will once again vote for a no-deal Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, there speaks the true voice of Scotland. And she is perfectly correct in what she says. And I venture to say, Mr. Speaker, that the constituents of the party opposite, the SNP, overwhelmingly tonight want that party, even that party, to get Brexit done and move this country on. I bet they do, Mr. Speaker.
I simply understand. Sammy Wilson. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said there'll be no border down the Irish Sea, yet every good imported from GB into Northern Ireland will be subject to a customs declaration, a physical movement subject to checks, and tariffs have to be paid until it can be proved where the goods are going to. Will he accept that he may have avoided a regulatory border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but he has put a legal, customs and economic border between the country to which we belong and the economy to which we depend? Rather than a great deal, this will do a great deal of damage to the Union.
It will. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, Mr. Speaker, what this does is protects Northern Ireland by extracting Northern Ireland whole and entire from the EU customs union, allows Northern Ireland to join the whole of the UK in setting our own tariffs, and insofar as there may be checks at a few places in Northern Ireland, physical checks would only involve 1% of the goods coming in, and if that is too much of a burden, then it is open to the people of Northern Ireland by a majority to decide that they no longer wish to participate in those arrangements. It is being done by consent. It is a very ingenious scheme that gets Northern Ireland out of the customs union and allows the whole of the UK to do free trade together with minimum bureaucracy.
Mr. Henry Smith.
So there we were listening to UK lawmakers holding that historic Brexit debate. We heard their UK lawmakers debating the Brexit deal and Prime Minister Johnson addressing the points that had been raised. We'll keep you updated on the Brexit developments. Well, a maritime case between two East African neighbors has been postponed until June 2020. The case between Somalia and Kenya was due to be heard early next month, but the International Court of Justice says it will no longer tolerate any delays to the process. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bella reports now from Mogadishu.
The International Court of Justice has postponed the hearing of a much-anticipated maritime case between Somalia and Kenya. The case has been moved to June 2020 following a request from Nairobi. Mogadishu had earlier warned against any postponement, but has since accepted the court's verdict.
This is the final postponement to the court hearing. The International Court of Justice has issued a statement on the same. There will be no single day extended again. The court has asked both Somalia and Kenya to avail themselves for oral hearings from the 8th to the 12th of June 2020.
The move has angered many in the country. Locals argue that it's a part of a plot to delay justice over the ownership of territory along the Indian Ocean, said to have rich oil and gas deposits.
I am not pleased with the postponement, but it is my wish that the case will be heard next year. I'm certain that Somalia will win the case. And this is the reason Kenya is seeking to delay the case.
The disputed area belongs to Somalia and no one can claim it. I urge the Somali public to remain optimistic despite the postponement and support the president and the government in its endeavors.
The hearing of the case coincides with planned parliamentary elections slated for next year. The maritime case is also expected to become a key issue of concern in the campaign period that is expected to kick off mid-next year. The outcome of the case is also expected to have serious political implications, with presidential elections set for early 2021. A meeting between Somali and Kenyan leaders, brokered by the Egyptian president and the current African Union chairman Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, failed to yield tangible results last month in New York. Somalia's President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo also ruled out the possibility of an out-of-court settlement, a move proposed by Kenya.
Somalia has pledged to comply with the court's final judgment and to accept the boundary that is delimited by the court. And we trust that when that judgment is issued and the boundary is established, a lasting settlement of this long-lasting dispute will finally be achieved.
The maritime dispute has been a major cause of a diplomatic standoff between Nairobi and Mogadishu. Both sides, however, agreed last month to restore diplomatic ties as they await the court's final judgment. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, including UNICEF urges Ugandan government to pay attention to childhood nutrition. And we look at how Nigerian film Lionheart has been selected by the country's committee for Oscars.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, in news coming in, it says that South Sudan's main opposition leader and designated first Vice President Riek Machar is in South Sudan's capital, Juba. Machar is expected to meet President Salva Kiir as part of a team that will meet a delegation of the UN Security Council visiting South Sudan on Sunday. The UNSC team is in the country on a fact-finding mission and also offer support for the ongoing peace effort that should secure a unity government based on the signed revitalized peace agreement. The deal provides for a formation of a unity government by November the 12th, 2019. A study by UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Agency, has called on the government of Uganda to pay urgent attention to childhood nutrition. The State of Uganda's Children's Report found that 3 in every 10 children under the age of 5 are malnourished. CGTN's Isabel Nakira reports.
Jacinta Akiranyo's 1-year-old baby is on a special diet. The family has been receiving medical treatment here due to poor nutrition. Tracking the weight of children is essential in improving their health.
I've learned that I should try to feed my baby as much as possible by giving a variety of bodybuilding foods like eggs, greens, and milk.
Jacinta's baby and hundreds more in Uganda's eastern district of Karamoja are not being adequately fed. That's partly because of the region's semi-arid climate, which makes it difficult to grow food. But a lack of information is compounding the problem. UNICEF is trying to teach people in the hardest hit areas how to maximize nutritional value from available resources. They are hoping educating parents will help improve development of children in Uganda. Experts point to a lack of nutritional diversity in children's diets.
If you further analyze the diet of our Ugandan children, it is predominantly a starch-based, carbohydrate-based diet. A child is fed on cassava, a child is fed on sweet potatoes, a child is fed on posho, and the diet is lacking in terms of the bodybuilding foods that children need because they're in a rapid state of growth.
UNICEF study found that poor nutrition has stunted the growth of 200 million children around the world. In Uganda, nutritionists say that can be prevented.
We actually do grow a variety of foods. But the question is, how are we able to use the locally available foods to improve the local diets of our children? Add a vegetable to that plate, give a fruit to that child, so that at the end of the day, the plate for that child has more of the beans and peas, the vegetables, and less of the cassava, potatoes, and the posho.
The report points to changing weather patterns that are affecting agriculture production in Uganda. But there is also widespread ignorance about proper diets for children. Feeding programs like this one are working to improve that. And nutritionists hope they can give mothers like Jacinta a jump start in helping their babies grow without deficiencies. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, South Africa is also keen to have a future where no child is unjustly denied the opportunity to reach their full potential. It's trying to achieve this through the Grow Great campaign. The campaign aims to confront the hidden challenge of stunted growth that results from chronic undernutrition in South Africa. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
Stunting is a condition that arises from prolonged undernutrition and affects physical and brain development. The Grow Great campaign seeks to galvanize South Africa to reach zero stunting by 2030 using data to mobilize policymakers. It's also a movement that aims to confront the hidden challenge of stunting that results from chronic undernutrition here in South Africa. According to experts here, 1 in 4 of South African children under the age of 5 years old are stunted. And stunting robs young children from reaching their full potential.
Stunting shortchanges the next generation's capacity to learn and undermines their ability to find jobs and contribute to our economy. It also leaves them in worse health, robbing them of full and productive lives and denying them the opportunity to reach their full potential, as well as placing burden on an already fragile health system and overstretched state services.
Stunted children on average perform worse at school than their non-stunted counterparts. They are more likely to be unemployed as adults.
Evidence is out there that children who are stunted are more likely to develop diabetes and hypertension, making things worse. In countries with high prevalence of stunting, the GDP lost is very high, 60% of the GDP, because of stunting, because of malnutrition.
Stunting mostly affects the poorest communities. Achieving zero stunting is not only good for the health of the children and communities, it's good for economies too.
Our country recognizes that initiatives which are focused on stunting are investment in the future, and investment made in nutrition for the child in the first 1,000 days. There's a period from conception to birth, to the second birthday, lasts a lifetime. And this can never be taken away from a child.
The campaign will include high-power public media and face-to-face programs throughout the country, drawing on strategies shown to work in other countries. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Friday. Wang Yi conveyed Chinese President Xi Jinping's cordial greetings, with the South African president sending good wishes back. The pair touched on their growing bilateral relations. They touched on the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as regional and international issues. Both South Africa and China are part of the BRICS, a group consisting of 5 emerging economies. Well, the Nigerian film Lionheart is in the vying to be nominated for the 2020 Oscars. Directed by Genevieve Nanji, Lionheart has been selected as a submission for International Feature Film category of the 2020 Oscars. CGTN's Deji Batma sat down with the chairperson of the Nigerian Oscars Selection Committee to discuss the fierce challenge Lionheart is facing.
What kind of competition do you think Lionheart will face in the awards proper?
It's going to be very tough. We are going to Nigeria is going to compete with 92 other countries. We have France, Uganda, Holland, China, different countries. So I think it's going to be tough. But it's also the first time we're submitting as a country. And being the second largest producing country for films, I think it's a step forward. But it is highly competitive, very competitive.
The Nigerian Oscar Selection Committee, which you heard, of course, has been in place since 2014. How come you never found any film worthy of selection until now?
The Nigeria Oscar Selection Committee has been in place since 2014, and we've been looking for films that will meet the requirements, that will be eligible. We poached films, and we did not find any at the time. But like you can see that the industry is growing every day, it's evolving. We have new players now on board, and so far, and that's why this year we received 14 entries. At least 6 met the requirements. It's not compulsory you submit every year. You're not pressured to submit because it's like you're wasting your time. It's very competitive, but this year I think we're ready to. We received good entries, and that's why we picked one that we think is qualified to compete on the global stage.
Do you think Nigeria could be closing in now on winning its first Oscars with this film?
I think Nigeria, this is the first submission, and I also think this is a step forward into competing on that stage. So, like I said, fingers crossed. We're hopeful.
Now, for future awards, what would be your advice for our local filmmakers here? What would you tell them?
I think if filmmakers need to go to our website, the Nigerian Oscar Selection Committee. The website is called thenosc.org, and they will see all the requirements. I think it's basically Film 101. If you understand Film 101, you will understand the rules of making good movies. So I think that's it. We should not just think of competing locally. We need to compete on that stage. So I think it's time for filmmakers who have worked internationally to also shoot films for us. And most importantly, I want to encourage the indigenous filmmakers, the Hausas, the Yorubas, the Igbos, the Kanuris, the Ibibios, the Calabars. Now it's time for them to start shooting their stories in their dialect. And also we are encouraging documentarians to make documentary, because this is open not just to films, but also to documentary and animation.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return the latest in the world of business. Here's what you can expect. South African cabinet approves a long-term electricity generation plan. And Ghana accuses Nigeria of unfair trade practices. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live, your business news now. Well, South Africa's Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, says the country's latest long-term electricity generation plan has been gazetted following cabinet approval. Despite aiming to add 6 gigawatts of new solar generation capacity, 2.5 gigawatts of hydropower, and over 14 gigawatts of wind, even by 2030, coal will still be the dominant source of South Africa's generation mix. Well, CGTN's Angela Coppola reports.
The plan was announced on day 3 of national rolling blackouts that has seen productivity in the country plummet. This as Eskom scrambles to repair damaged power units. The document is very similar to the plan discussed in March, which was rejected by organised labour. The nuclear industry were also expecting some good news.
Labour is going to be seriously put out, and the nuclear industry is going to be very disappointed. I think for the balance, it is essentially the same. There's a significant amount of renewable energy in the form of wind, solar PV, gas, battery storage, and small-scale embedded generation.
Part of the announcement around the energy plan is a call for an urgent request for information to provide emergency electricity quickly to fill the gap that's caused the latest round of load shedding.
We have Eskom as a sole supplier at the moment. We are diversifying our markets. In so doing, as Minister is saying, in everything you do, you must be systematic. You can't just open up without having some restrictions on certain energy mixes. So you need a strategic approach to deal with that. So that's what we're trying to do. That's why our regulatory framework must be flexible enough, but at the same time be systematic in how to cap where it's necessary.
The electricity situation is becoming critical, and it's estimated that it's costing the country over $100 million a day in lost productivity and revenue. But the country is still keeping coal as the anchor resource for now.
If we accelerate destruction of coal power station without a proper transition, we are going to have an energy disaster because we're emotional in dealing with practical problems. Instead of relaxing, deal with the problem, address them, move systematically step by step. If we don't do that, we're going to have a disaster.
We have another plan to deal with the electricity crisis in South Africa, and hopefully this one can be implemented properly so that we can avoid any more load shedding. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, traders in Ghana are accusing their giant West African neighbor Nigeria of unfair trade practices. This is due to the closure of the Nigerian border with Benin. It has led to exporters' goods worth millions of dollars getting stranded at the frontier. Nigeria closed its border 2 months ago, saying it needed to end the smuggling of goods like rice. Ghanaian traders affected by the situation want their government and regional trade bloc, the Economic Community of West African States, to intervene. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafai reports from Accra.
Car parts dealer George Esiedu is one of many traders in Ghana whose goods are stranded at the Nigerian border. He says he's not been able to move his goods out of Nigeria for 2 months.
I am very worried about the situation. I fear some of my goods could get destroyed by heat as they remain at the border.
And businesses like George's won't be able to survive indefinitely under these conditions. George Esiedu says he took a loan from the bank to invest in his business. As his goods remain locked up at the Nigerian border in Benin, he is struggling to raise the money to pay back. Nigeria closed its border in neighboring Benin in a move to stop what it says are inferior products and also rice from being smuggled into the country. Africa is trying to open its market up to over 1.2 billion people on the continent through a continental free trade agreement. Some traders say the situation in Nigeria could affect its implementation.
This continental free trade agreement that all the African countries have signed and is supposed to come into effect next year. If these are some of the things that countries like Nigeria are going to do, then I don't think the continental Africa free trade is going to work.
Ghana's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it has begun negotiations with the Nigerian government to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, Nigeria's government says its land border with neighboring countries will remain closed until 2020.
I think the earlier the better. The ECOWAS Commission and, for that matter, the Ghana government engage in Nigeria for them to open the border as soon as possible so that there will be free movement of goods, people and services.
George Esiedu says it is more expensive to use alternative routes to move his goods out of Nigeria aside the border in Benin. If the border isn't opened soon, he may not be able to restock his warehouse with goods. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's mining industry has seen some interesting developments over the last couple of years, but most of its potential remains untapped. The mining sector contributes less than 1% to the West African economy's GDP. CGTN's Kelechi M. Kalam explores how this can change.
An array of some of Nigeria's finest precious stones and mineral resources, all under one roof at this year's mining conference. Government is interacting with industry players from over 22 countries. They're seeking ways to harness the economic benefits of mining. Nigeria's mining sector has been identified as a viable option for economic diversification, and the country is repositioning itself as the next destination for investors.
We want to assure all prospective investors that we are willing to cooperate and give them the necessary backing to thrive in this economy. The federal government is relaunching the economy on the path of inclusive and sustainable growth through the Economy Recovery Growth Plan, ERGP. The plan is aimed at increasing national productivity and achieving sustainable diversification of the economy through the mining sector.
There are sufficient mineral resources in Nigeria to kickstart a boom in the industry. However, funding, insecurity, Poor infrastructure and weak regulations are some of the problems facing the growth of the sector. Illegal mining too has been thriving, and government has not been able to harness the enormous potential from the mining sector.
The quick way for the government to benefit from these resources is by virtue of taxing the companies that mine these resources. And we're currently going through a major tax reform in the country to have a tax system that is more straightforward and more easily enforced. So that's the first step. I think the second step as well is having proper coordination between the state and the federal government in terms of knowing who these miners are, what they are mining, where they are mining, and being able to get their share of whatever proceeds come from those mines.
Mining contributes about 0.5% to the country's GDP. Nigeria's mining roadmap is targeting a 3% contribution by 2025. Investors and other stakeholders here are hopeful for the future of this thriving industry as a viable alternative for economic diversification. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Collectively, the Middle East and North Africa are home to an enormous collection of historical and cultural assets, the most famous of which are the pyramids in Egypt. But there's plenty more in the region, like remains from the city-state of Carthage when it challenged the Roman Republic for dominance of the Mediterranean and present-day Spain over 2,000 years ago. Figuring out how to better promote tourism around these assets is a focus of the second joint conference of Arab ministers of tourism and culture. CGTN's Adnan Shiwashi has that report.
Tunisian Minister of Cultural Affairs advocated the adoption of an Arab strategy that aims at a certain autonomy of the heritage sector through the creation of ministries that will take charge of heritage in the various countries of the region.
A cooperation and partnership agreement has been signed between the Ministries of Tourism and Handicrafts and its counterparts in cultural affairs, aimed at boosting cultural tourism and the diversification of the tourism on offer.
This meeting is also an opportunity to study the initiative of the Tunisian Ministry of Cultural Affairs relating to the digitization of heritage with a view to its integration into economic development through cultural tourism in North Africa in the Arab region.
In Algeria, we are digitizing the 100 central museums at the national level and dozens in municipal areas and governorates. The digitization of historic sites is also underway.
Tourism Minister Netrabilsi called for further strengthening the joint partnership between the Ministries of Tourism and Culture of the Arab countries through events such as the organization of tourism and cultural festivals that take place at archaeological and historical sites in order to enhance their value.
Tunisia is committed to the strategic choices adopted by all the countries of the Arab region. This vision reflects the concern to further promote tourism as well as culture in these countries through mechanisms of common partnership between these two vital sectors.
Participants have agreed on a roadmap which provides for the monitoring of the progress of work on the initiative on complementarity between tourism and civilizational and cultural heritage in the Arab region. Arab ministers adopted the Tunisian initiative related in particular to the preservation of the tangible heritage, the archaeological and historical monuments, and the promotion of museum tourism in the whole Arab region. Finding the necessary means of financing is at the heart of the Tunisian initiative. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, protests continue to rock Barcelona as Catalan separatists clashed again with police. The anger was sparked after almost a dozen Catalan leaders were sentenced to jail for their roles in pushing for independence 2 years ago. CGTN's Laia Halpern has more from Barcelona.
A fifth day of protests have brought Barcelona to a standstill in what is being described as Spain's biggest political crisis in 40 years. Thousands marched to the city from 5 different areas of the Catalonian region.
Today I'm not going to be paid in order to be here, but the people who are really making sacrifices are those who've been jailed because they've lost their family life.
Friday's general strike saw planes cancelled and public transports reduced to a minimum.
In my situation with this disability, if they cancel trains and block off highways, it's more difficult for me. I arrived by underground. I had to come into the city at midnight when things were calm and before the metro closed.
The Spanish government says people have a right to protest, but it must be done peacefully.
The right to protest must be protected by all public powers, and that is what the Spanish government does. And it should also be exercised in a totally peaceful manner.
Meanwhile, some Barcelona businesses and residents express fears the protest would hurt the economy, with many shops and cafes in the city centre closed on Friday night. The entrances of many Barcelona historic sites were blocked off by protesters earlier in the day, including Sagrada Familia, where tourists were briefly trapped inside. But the peaceful protest turned quickly violent as Spanish police forces clashed with the separatist protesters for a 6th night in a row. As the political uncertainty continues to build, the future of Catalonia remains in the balance. And many understand that the demand for independence may not stand a chance. They want to be respected and they want to be heard. Leah Heilpan, CGTN, Barcelona.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, don't go away.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. We go to South Africa where Yomelela Sithole, better known as Young Creator, is a self-taught drawer who uses the medium of charcoal, a pen and pencils. Sithole has created a robust following for himself via social media. CGTN's Elisa Njamela has more.
Yomelela Sithole is one of many young South Africans who are unable to pursue their studies beyond matric because of financial constraints. Sithole's parents simply couldn't help him further his studies, so he opted to use his natural talent, which is drawing, to make a living. Yomelela's journey of art began very early on in his life as he would draw on walls and on novel books.
I started from the young age. I used to draw on walls and get in trouble and that. And then after matric in 2015, that's when I started drawing every day. And I've been posting my work on social media. I've got a lot of response from the media. A lot of people love my work.
So we asked him to describe himself in his own words.
I consider myself as a hyper-realistic artist. I'm 21 and I'm a self-taught artist. I work with different mediums, mainly that's charcoal and graphite pencils and pen and colored pencils. Those are the main mediums. Hyper-realistic art is like drawings that are more lifelike.
The young artist is now making a name for himself via social media. He has impressed thousands of social media users with his realistic impressions of popular celebrities and figureheads, including one of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa during the state inauguration event.
The president got so much responses. I think because people know the president. Yeah. So I got a lot of clients, I got a lot of feedback from people. And my page is very big now compared to when I started back then. So I'm growing every day.
He takes pride in what he does and meticulously works on each piece, affording all his work absolute attention. Still, some work stands out more.
I like that drawing where it has the chocolate dripping because I like the effect it has on the drawing at large. I use colored pencil, brown chocolate colored pencil. And T-Pex, I also use it to bring the highlights on the chocolate.
Yomelela's work is attracting art lovers from many parts of the world already.
Earlier this year, I had a client from London in UK. I also have clients here in South Africa. Almost every province, I had a client there. I'm hoping to get a lot of clients than I actually have now. I like to add value to other people. Yeah. So I see my work as sort of adding value to other people.
The young creator says this is just the beginning for him, that we're bound to hear more about him. Yudisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Sports news after the break. Here's what's still to come. South Africa hosts an international tennis event for both able-bodied and